Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Susan joins me to discuss a Hechinger Report article by Charlotte West. The article is entitled, "An Unnoticed Result of the Decline of Men in College. It's Harder for Women to Get In." Esther from Tennessee shared a Speakpipe question, and she wants to know when a student should notify a college that they will not be coming. We'll have the final part of my interview with Ronne Turner, the Vice Provost of Admissions at WashU. And we'll also have the final part of my college spotlight with Linda Depker on the University of Redlands. Okay, Susan is back, and I'm really excited about your tip, Susan, so share it with our listeners.
Oh, you bet, Mark. Well, I feel in a way like I'm always giving tips based on where I am in the application review process this year.
But that's good, because where you are is also where the listener is, especially if they're in the senior class.
That's
right. If they're the junior, the sophomore, the freshman class, they always like learning in advance. So
that's right. Well, and having been in a school for so long and now being back on the application evaluation side, I really feel what the kids are going through, because you remember what it was like. We lived day to day with kids in a school in anticipation of their decisions and working so hard. And now when I read applications, I really think about the kids and the families behind the applications. That's not to say that we aren't decisive and making strict evaluative decisions day in and day out. But, I'm often the person in committee-based evaluation that says, here's what's going on right now.
Well, that's the advantage of you not having been too far removed from the high school side.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I spoke about this recently. I really feel that colleges need to hire either more people that have been on the school side, or at a minimum have more of an advisory board where they're constantly talking to hear what's out there. And I base that on the fact that, one thing I love to do, Susan, is ask people that flip from the other side of the desk from admissions to counseling, what is it you didn't learn until you got over here? And most of them, they're chagrined. They're like, oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed at the anti-student things that we were doing, and I had no idea. And so that's a disconnect. And so it's good that you're bringing that perspective.
Well, I think what has been so important to me just these 5 years now that I've been back reading applications is realizing how many students sell themselves short. That, let me tell you, where my university is right now in the evaluation process, we're 3rd week, close to the end of February. There's a decision on every application, except for the ones that maybe were incomplete until very recently, and the staff has been chasing missing credentials. Although, truthfully, you begin to assume when an application is complete at this point in the year that that's a student who probably was admitted early decision somewhere else and does not plan on completing their application to our university, but they just haven't told us that. But after they've been told, by email, in their portal, they've been notified over and over again, and we haven't been getting the pieces of missing information, whatever that might be. The assumption is that that student has made another decision, and we're not going to bend over backwards at this point in the year. Universities right now are looking to reduce the number of students they're about to admit. Every university has targets in terms of admitted students, and a lot of those are by category. I happen to be working for a university that has, a business undergraduate program, an engineering undergraduate, and any university that's reading for programs that are professional in nature. So other than the larger arts and sciences kind of melting pot of kids, think of nursing and even education to a certain extent, any of the allied health fields, the DPTs and the pharmacy programs, all of those have different target admissions situations going on because their yields are very different.
Mm-hmm.
When I worked for a little old liberal arts college,
it was very different, wasn't it?
Well, we admitted a third of the kids who applied, and then a third of them enrolled.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not true anymore at very selective small liberal arts colleges. It's a far cry, but there still are a lot of colleges like that. They basically know we're going to admit a certain percentage of the pool, and they might vary that a little bit by male, female, which is something we'll be talking about, might be geographic, demographic types of variations there. But, you admit a certain percentage and you yield a certain percentage. But it's so much more complicated, especially nowadays where kids are applying to divisions of study and even to certain majors within those. So right now, there's a decision on every application, admit, deny, waitlist, or incomplete, can't make a decision.
Sure.
And practically every university on the planet has too many kids in the admit category, because when you're reading through the pool, you're in a generous place. You don't quite know what your standards are going to be, how deep the pool is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the right thing. You should be reading kind of with an equity mindset. So right now, a few of us non-full-time staff members, right? We're kind of the people who get called in to do a variety of projects. I am reading mid-year grades. So I had 500 or 600. I didn't never count because the list looked so long. It was so intimidating. But I basically had to just go through application by application, look at the mid-year grade report. Mm-hmm. Seniors, I'm sure this is putting the striking fear into the heart of every senior who might be.
We want.
Yeah, I know. But then I would need to compare those grades to the point at which that particular student's admissions decision had been made. So it wasn't just looking at the senior year grades in a vacuum, in isolation, because I had to put myself in the position of the readers who saw that student holistically and affixed all the ratings and made the decision at a certain point in time. So some of those decisions were made a long time ago because applications were complete, and some of them were made very recently. So some were made only with transcripts with grades on them through the end of the junior year. So I needed to look at the 9th through 11th grade transcript and then compare it to where the senior was achieving halfway through their senior year. In some cases, we had already seen a first quarter, first marking period, first trimester grade report of some kind. So in that case, I couldn't overreact to the mid-year grades without seeing, well, when was this decision made? So I just wanted to make sure that listeners understood that there's a little bit of a difference in the points of comparison. So my job was basically to say, what are we experiencing with this student in terms of senior year achievement? The important thing to know, parents, is that colleges understand that kids at the beginning of the senior year are pulling out all the stops. They're taking perhaps the most rigorous course program they've ever taken. Very important that that's balanced so that they don't shoot themselves in the foot, right? But they're stepping up to the plate. They're showing us what they're capable of doing. So after the first marking period, especially because so many of these kids are applying ED and EA, there's a letdown. So the straight A student who suddenly gets a couple of B's or B pluses may think that they've ended their chances of admission at any selective school. And that, I can't speak for all schools, but a little bit of a letdown is generally not the kiss of death. But colleges have those standards for themselves, and no one can speak for another institution.
Sure.
What we definitely look at is, have kids dropped any classes?
Yeah.
Right? That is the kiss of death. Unless there was a process that the student went through that involved us and potentially the guidance counselor or the college counselor at the high school to gain an understanding of why maybe for a particular student that might have been an important choice, a very important choice to make.
So, Susan, there's a lot of tips in here. One is don't drop a course without consultation, especially an academic course.
Absolutely.
An academic course, because remember, you've already listed on the Common Application what courses you're taking.
That's right.
So that's factored into the decision. Your senior year rigor, even if they don't see senior year grades, just knowing what your senior year rigor is one thing that gets factored in. And so it's like, okay, we judged you by this standard, but so that's one tip. You gave a very important tip that I don't even know if you knew you did. When you said decisions have been made, I really want our listeners to know this. So you're going to hear this the first week of March. Susan and I are recording this early. We're recording this on February 21st. So it's important for listeners to know February 21st, most decisions have been made, and colleges are now going into what they often call shaping the class down, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, making sure that it's balanced according to the school's own institutional priorities and programmatic needs. And so that's another thing that's really important because, I'm still getting questions from people that are saying things like, could I hop a plane and go visit somewhere and show them demonstrated interest? Could I have another letter come in? I'm getting these questions in late February. And it's important for people to know, like, that ship has sailed.
That's right.
And then what specifically do you want them to know about how you're comparing grades? Because I saw a few things there. It could be, don't overly stress out if there was a little bit of a dip. Or it could also be, just know that process is happening and it could still have bearing on the decision. So was there one there you were trying to emphasize there, or both?
Well, I think what we are told to use kind of as our yardstick as we're doing this is a significant decline in a class.
Mm-hmm.
So someone that goes from an A to a C.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened, in a class. When I see that, I always look to see if the student, or I flag it for the manager of that geographic school group area. Sure. To look to see if the student, because I'm not looking at that, I'm not doing that level of analysis, but the staff is the geographic leaders are doing that,
or senior people even. Yeah,
absolutely. Mm-hmm. And to see what was going on, because I don't want to say off with their heads. Sure. If the student already wrote in to say, I had appendicitis and Correct. Missed 3 weeks of school, or if this, a family circumstance, or a wildfire or mudslide, and
colleges see it all, don't they?
Yeah, we really do. And we're never going to put the screws to a student who has been on the receiving end of a tragic or highly influential family circumstance. Now, if the student doesn't share any information, either themselves or their counselor, it's your responsibility to get information to the colleges, because we'll use the information that comes in to kind of determine how we are or are not going to be influenced by that. Generally, if there's a big decline in a grade, we know something happened, because especially if you've been a very consistent, A, B student in rigorous classes, and suddenly you get a D in something, or what if all your grades go down? So that's that leads us to draw other conclusions. When there's a decline across the board, then if there's no explanation, you're left to wonder if that student simply took their foot off the gas, which would be very unusual, Mark, for a high achiever.
Yeah, one thing I find, Susan, most of the time, I can actually build a student's college list, certainly at the end of 10th. And a lot of times, even after one semester in 10th, and of course, I have to be monitoring it to see if it will go down or up. And of course, you build a list with range in there anyway.
Sure.
But most of the time, I don't have to adjust. In fact, this was an interesting thing when I was at KIPP. When I first started out at KIPP, I was director of high school placement. So I was sending kids to boarding school. So I was working with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
I remember.
Then I became director of college counseling, and I was working with 11th and 12th. Do you know the top kids in 6th grade were the same top kids in 11th and 12th almost every time?
Amazing.
So yeah, there's usually remarkable consistency. But there's another really good tip in here too. Everything we're talking about notification doesn't only apply to seniors, right? So that same grade dippage that occurs in 10th or 11th, that families need to also inform and explain what went on. And of course, we did a whole interview with Amin Gonzalez, a mutual friend of Susan and I, on when and how to use the additional information section.
That's right. That's right. So important for colleges to have that context. And I'm shocked. I continue just to be shocked all the time, Mark, by what goes unexplained in applications, and sometimes by the lack of corroborating information provided by the school in any way, shape, or form. But, the kid who's authoring the application, of course, has to consider how they're going to tell their story. And if they've had ups and downs, to flesh that out as just part of the application, writing the application.
I would think you would see a correlation between when you're shocked and if somebody's coming from a private school or more of a well-resourced family, because I would think that if you're working in a private school counseling environment where the counselors have college admissions experience and 30 or 40 on their caseload, or it's more of an affluent suburban family that's probably working with an independent educational counselor, those things wouldn't get missed. But when I think about big public schools with 600 to 1, 400 to 1 ratios, unless those families are listening to podcasts like this and others, how are they to know? Like, it's really not something natural that they would even know to do if they're not in an environment where they're getting it in their schools or they're not self-educating.
You're absolutely right. And, some of it is, we've brought this on ourselves in our profession. And, we've glamorized the application and put kids in a position where they're afraid to disclose, or they use disclosure almost as a kind of a drama advantage. And that's obviously something I'd love to talk about that sometime. Sure. But there is definitely a balance. And I understand that teenagers and parents may not understand this. And I'm so grateful that our listeners get a lot of this information, by tuning in. But, my feeling is you get a lot more mileage in the application process from kind of disclosure. I would call it context. Mm-hmm. And with these seniors, where we're seeing grades that just don't line up with other parts of the transcript, they've got to be addressed, because admissions people do see it all, and there's just an annoyance that they feel left out of information that could help them make a much better admissions decision. And right now, where we're looking to remove kids from the admit category and either put them on the wait list or take them from the wait list and just deny them, right? Because those numbers have to be thinned at this point. It's the kids who help us understand what's going on in their world. And I don't want to make this sound like every single application looks this way. I'm always amazed at the high-minded consistency of achievement that the majority of seniors are able to sustain over the senior year. But those are kids who, for the most part, paid careful attention to their senior year courses and didn't make mistakes of overloading or underwhelming, because both can count against you if you're applying to very selective colleges. It just can go either way.
Susan, this was really great. I intentionally let it run long because I think I know our listeners enough to know that they're probably sitting on their edge. And I really think in the future for your tips, I'm going to draw off of what you're seeing in the reading room. And I know that there's
sure.
a season for reading. You're in the middle of it now. But even when we get into the summer and all that, you'll still have memories from what happened.
Sure.
I think that this is why we're going to have the Colorado college staff on once every 3 months, because they're in the reading room, they're in committees, they're making those decisions. And of all the people on our team, you bring the freshest perspective on a monthly basis. And I think I'm remiss to have us go off on some other thing when you can take us right into the college reading experience. So I'm not going to forget that. So you'll see.
All right.
Now on, it's going to be like, give us a tip from the reading experience, Susan.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
All right. So our admissions vernacular is just an acronym you'll sometimes see used, LOCI, and letter of continued interest. Letter of continued interest. And so some schools like these, some don't. But it has to do with if you are deferred, are you still interested, or have you moved on? Let us know so that we can, know whether or not we should still consider you or not effectively remove you from our numbers. And so when colleges want that, they will indicate to you that they want that. It's very important that you don't give them more than they want, which is very hard for people to do, especially people who are used to being in control, whether it's running their own business or controlling their classroom or controlling their surgeries or whatever. But LOCI, letter of continued interest. And the big number today is 7. And that is the fact that 7 times more men than women pulled out of the college process, according to a recent study during the heart of the pandemic, which is a staggering number, but it also sets us up as a good segue into our article.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So our article is about something Susan and I have been talking about, which is the discrepancy that oftentimes can exist at some schools and certainly some programs between admission rates for men, admission rates for women. Important topics are ones we come back to. I went back and looked at this. We had a conversation. Douglas Belkin from the Wall Street Journal ran a good article on this about 15 months ago, but it's time to return to it. So this is an article from the Hechinger Report, and it's called An Unnoticed Result of the Decline of Men in College, it's harder for women to get in. And it's by Charlotte West. And it features quite a few people, some who were quite candid about what's going on and some who were more guarded. But one of the main people it features is Shayna Medley, who worked at Brandeis from 2012 to 2014. And she said the message back then, nearly a decade ago, was find more men. And then it goes on to say this is a trend that would soon accelerate, worsening a growing divide. The article talks about how 50 years ago, 60% of college students were men and 40% were women. And now it's literally reversed itself. And the latest numbers, more than 59.5% are women. If you rounded it up, it would be 60%. And another quote from Medley, she said, toward the end of filling out the class, there would definitely be a push to look for more men to admit. It goes on to say that another quote from Medley, given a male student and a female student with a similar profile at Brandeis, for example, the university would potentially admit the male student and waitlist the female student because of wanting to get close to some sort of gender parity in the percentages. Now, they contacted a recent spokesman at Brandeis, who said Brandeis does not currently use gender as a factor in its admission process, and its acceptance rates were 31% for men and 35% for women in 2020. The article goes on to say that there are several schools who clearly have gender differential acceptance rates for men versus women, and just lists a few. It lists Boston University, Bowdoin, Swarthmore Brown, Denison Pepperdine, Pomona, Vanderbilt, Wesleyan, University of Miami, to name a few that all had at least a 2% differential. It says Pitzer College admitted 20% of men last year compared to 15% for women. Vassar accepted 28% for men, 25% for women. So they both had a 5% differential rate. Now, this is important. So Hechinger reached out to 28 selective colleges to get them to comment on this. And this will just show you how this is a hot potato contentious issue. And let me restate that. Hechinger reached out to 28 selective schools that had a higher acceptance rate for men, and to get them to talk about what's going on. And 25 of the 28 declined the request to be interviewed. Then there's a quote from a counselor. It says, it really does sort of go counter to so much of the message that colleges want to send forth, which is everyone is welcome. Everyone has a chance of getting in. And then there's another quote from another counselor here, and it says, former admission officer, who says, they don't want it to look like they are giving male students an advantage in this process. But whether they admit it or not, gender balance is almost always a pretty big institutional priority, because prospective families can see it on the tours and students can feel it when they enroll. Some time ago, former admission director at Kenyon had a New York Times op-ed we discussed on the podcast, said, where are all the men? And talked about how it was easier for men to get in. She said, as a feminist, I hate to say this, we work so hard, and now this is the world that we live in. And boy, she had the darts coming for her head. So a lot of people don't like to talk out on this conversation. Another quote from one of the counselors says, recruiters want to be very careful not to discourage women from applying. The bigger the applicant pool, the more selective the institution looks. In other words, explaining why nobody really wants to come clean and talk about this. A couple other people that are quoted in the article are Sonia Smith, Dean of Admissions and Student Financial Services at Vassar. And she says gender is taken into account in the context along with many other factors. Because so many more women than men apply to liberal arts colleges, if an institution wants to have gender balance on campus, there's not a lot you can do other than discriminate, says Charlie Deacon, Dean of Admission at Georgetown, who's been there 50 years. He says, you can argue you're not discriminating because you're trying to get a balance, but there isn't much else you can do besides make gender a factor. He goes on to say that Georgetown does not consider gender in its review, but, that's what he said. So figure out what your thoughts are on that. And then it goes on to say, guess what? The disparity's only grown since the pandemic. Enrollment has declined overall 2.5%, but decline among men was more than 7 times as steep. The article does point out that most of the schools that got rid of race-based affirmative, most of the states that got rid of race-based affirmative action also got rid of the ability to look at gender at the same time for public schools. And it mentions California, Washington, Florida, Arizona, Michigan, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and the most recent state to join that list is Idaho. So I want to know what your thoughts are. Susan, take it wherever you want to go.
Well, that was a great summary, Mark, because it's a very complicated issue, right? Because whenever we start talking about diversity, and it's been such a hot topic this year with the race-based admissions being called into question, which then opened Pandora's box about legacy admissions and athletic admissions and all the populations that are recruited by colleges in order to sustain a robust educational community, which is why we're also interested in how the Supreme Court is going to argue potentially against the value of diversity within educational settings as a value to all people. But that's what we've been alluding to pretty much every week. I don't think this whole issue is about it's getting harder for women and well-qualified women are being dissed by less well-qualified men. I mean, not that hasn't been the history of the world, right? For especially education in the United States. But, women have come a long way in higher ed, particularly in STEM fields, where, coming out of World War II, despite Rosie the Riveter and all the women like my mother who had stepped into male jobs because the men were gone. And then, oh my goodness, what a shock. They were well qualified and businesses thrived. But then they disappeared just as quickly as men came back and women moved back into childcare and men resumed executive and other leadership positions. I think it's a fascinating sociological study. And I read a couple of articles that gave us good historical context that I think Hechinger could have used in this argument. But women receded from business and STEM during that time. They had actually, stepped forward. I mean, look at Hidden Figures and some of the fabulous movies we've seen that have given us glimpses into that. But it wasn't until we took responsibility of improving access to higher level math for girls in public schools and encouraging girls to persist in higher level math. That's what changed things on the college level. Was we finally got girls to move forward and see themselves as well prepared for science and technology and math fields of study at a higher level. And look at the difference we've made. I remember what an impact it had on a girl's application to college. And I'm talking about the 80s, 90s, right up to the year 2000, where a gal well qualified for a science, computer science, math field of study was given an enormous boost in the admissions process because there were so few of them that were willing to persist and then to step into that very male space on the college level. And I credit the liberal arts colleges in the country for building those bridges way before the science and technology universities, which were hostile, much more hostile to women. Even some of the Ivies, that started going co-ed in the 70s and into, what was it you mentioned just the other day? It was Columbia that didn't finally
get
until 82. But these were not happy, welcoming communities for women, even though they went co-ed. These women were soldiers and had to persist. But the liberal arts colleges, many of which had been co-ed or happily went co-ed and welcomed women early on, not to forget the very excellent women's colleges that were already leading the charge in this regard. But I think of Bates College in Maine. Granted, that's one of the oldest co-ed colleges in the United States, second only to Oberlin. Women there were recruited hand over fist for science and technology, and colleges like Bates and all of the NESCAC schools and the great Pennsylvania and Ohio liberal arts colleges.
Was also founded co-ed. A lot of people don't know that Swarthmore was founded co-ed. It makes it unique and distinct amongst a lot of other schools.
That's right. And
I think it's important. This is an important conversation because I think sometimes when you hear that schools went co-ed, you just assumed, oh, they must have really, really wanted women. But in reality, and I've seen this happen both in boarding schools and colleges as well, history with the Ivy Leagues where they were starting to have a hard time yielding men because some of the other non-Ivy selective schools had gone co-ed and men were finding that attractive.
That's right.
Or schools like the idea of, boy, we're going to look a lot more selective. Now we can lower our acceptance rate and build our brand. And those are very different messages than full gender equality.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, the Ivies and the schools of that selectivity were in the late 60s and early 70s looking at a very different couple of decades coming up in terms of demographics, particularly in the industrialized states. The 70s saw a loss of high school graduates in total, but particularly college bound at that level. The 70s was a devastating decade in the Northeast. And this was when a lot of colleges started recruiting nationally that had been very content with their regional applicant pools, and where even the Ivies, Williams, Amherst, think of all the liberal arts colleges, Bowdoin, Colby, that were male and clung to their maleness for a long time, saw a real problem with sustaining. Also, they were starting to get a lot of heat for using white privilege as a basis for admission. We'd come through both the women's movement and the civil rights movement, right? In the 60s and 70s. And they knew the handwriting was on the wall for the generations of white male privilege being able to sustain the kind of quality student body, perhaps, to which they were accustomed. And shockingly, they realized there were very, very smart women out there that would be very willing to come in and be the pioneers in that regard. The women, and I'll hearken back to my years in liberal arts admission in the 80s and into the 90s. Men were lagging. There was a lot of expectation that they were going to be successful in the college admission process. This was a long time ago. Let's remember that things were different, but the demographics were changing. But the kind of late bloomer profile, of the male athlete who was smart enough, but he would get kind of more disciplined once he went to college and got kind of on a career path, that started losing its luster. But the developmental differences were becoming far more pronounced as women were becoming more aggressive in high school about their academic preparation for college, whether it was STEM or not. They were, women were just raring to go in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And the men were getting left in their dust from a liberal arts college perspective. Now, everything started changing for the better, I think, as women became true competitors academically in high school and in college admissions. I think it was a magnificent transformation and a big step. And we started seeing people of color who would not have been in these educational pipelines starting to establish a track record. So all sorts of excellent things were happening even before we called it DEI. Right.
So Susan, do you feel colleges are honest with the public of gender divides in their applicant pool? And if they're not, do you feel like you kind of can't blame them because, boy, they could be setting yourself for lawsuit or something like that? Or do you think there needs to be more transparency? I mean, what is your take on that?
Well, the important thing to remember up front is it's not like we are admitting unqualified students in some category and rejecting highly qualified.
That's really important to
students.
say that.
It really is. It's not.
Because otherwise people will assume they'll go right to that qualified versus unqualified paradigm. Right. And they'll do it for gender. They'll do it for race. They'll do
everything.
It for everything. And part of that, I really believe, is how people sort of preserve their own ego. it's a lot easier to sort of say it wasn't fair, to sort of
That's right.
And I've observed that over the years in working with families. They're constantly talking about the kids from their school that got in that were not as strong as other ones, even if they're not talking about themselves in proxy. It just happens all the time. And I've just learned that it's a little bit of a coping mechanism, I think.
Of course. And, there isn't any kind of yardstick out there where the admissions office lines applicants up in some linear, incremental way. When I used to give a lot of public presentations on this, I would say, this isn't the sheep and the goats. There isn't a door for the sheep that goes to one pasture and a door for the goats that go down some bad some bad outcome. It's about degrees of strength and talent and ability and advantage. And even, when you and I had kids from the same high school applying to the same colleges, the students were never the same.
Sure.
Now, they were at the same school that had the same grading scale, but they were taking different classes. They had different academic interests. They had different backgrounds. They had come different distances.
Mm-hmm.
You and I know what that's all about. Is sometimes
Sure.
colleges look at the distance traveled.
Mm-hmm.
This is why some students think if they're not straight A, perfect, immaculate applicants, they're going to be at a disadvantage. In a way, what you want to see is distance traveled. So if you're the parent listening to this and your child is one of those very talented straight A students, make sure they are stretching and challenging themselves in other ways. Whether it's the rigor of their curriculum or experiences that they're going after, where the college can see a journey of pushing the boundaries of what it means to do excellent work and be an excellent person and student. You can't just say, well, straight A's, I'm done.
Susan, I literally had this conversation today. I had a phone call from a Florida family, and they wanted to get my opinion on something. They were observing, and not just, their school, but they're very well networked into a lot of schools. And they were of the impression that schools were not taking the top kid to take a little bit of a lesser kid. And they asked me if do colleges do that? And we weren't talking about yield protection. And the way I answered it, I said, I think it's a misunderstanding. I said, I think that students and parents have a tendency to think, okay, this kid was number 1 in the class. This kid was number 6 in the class. 1 is better than 6. Why would you take 6 over 1? Or this kid got a 1580 and this kid got a 1520. Why would you take a 1520 over a 1580? And the way I explained it is not how they think. I said, sure, you need to reach a threshold where you're admissible. But once you reach that threshold where you're admissible and they're confident that you can excel, that's more pass-fail. Okay, you passed. I like to think of admissions as a series of hurdles. You have to clear them all, right? So you have to clear, if you're submitting scores, you need to clear that hurdle, grades, rigor, recs, essays, all that. But then once you've cleared that hurdle, then it becomes a matter, well, either what is our institutional need or what personal qualities are you bringing or how do you best line up with the program?
Right, exactly.
And what are you bringing to our community to strengthen us? And it's not about your score was higher than your score, your GPA was higher than your GPA. And I find that students and parents are really locked into that thinking that student had higher grades and higher scores, therefore they were the stronger applicant. Why did the weaker applicant get selected over the stronger applicant? And it makes absolutely no sense to them. And I think as a podcast, I think we need to constantly talk about this because I think this is very deeply entrenched in how people think.
Well, and we have our friends at College Board and National Merit to thank for this. These metrics, these data points that get lifted up and given so much more meaning than they
But
really
even
have.
rank, I can't put rank on College Board, or that rank comes out of the school. Like sometimes they'll know that, you know what I mean, this person was the valedictorian, or they were scheduled, or the salutatorian, or whatever. They still think it, even apart from
Yes.
any testing.
Yeah, of course. And I've worked with some kids in Texas who, just missed that cutoff, that
Mhm.
rank cutoff for UT Austin.
Yeah.
And, it's a terrible, terrible way to do it. I understand why they do the rank.
It's probably things like that reinforce it. When you have stuff
It
like
does.
that,
It does.
reinforce that.
And
That-
I love to say to families that as an application reader at a very selective university that has, kind of top 10 programs especially in business and engineering, I don't think I notice rank. And I certainly don't notice the GPA that the high school gives me.
Yeah.
It may be kind of looked at in passing, but those are not fixed metrics that carry weight in a highly competitive, holistic process.
I don't think we can say that enough, because people
Yeah.
will say to me, when they're talking, they'll say the GPA is this, and that like it's supposed to mean so much. We know GPAs, for one, there's zillions of different GPA metrics out there.
That's right.
It means
That's
almost
right.
nothing until you even understand the grading of the school. And then you might want to look at the grade inflation, and then
Absolutely.
and all kinds of things, how your program of study lines up with where you've excelled versus where you haven't excelled, right? I
That's
mean, if
right.
you're interested in a math-based major and all your high grades are not in math, that's not going to bode well for you.
And here's a really good point, going back to our male-female discussion on that point, Mark. Boys, from my experience, tend to write applications that are less imbued with emotional intelligence. They tend to be more metric rich,
Mm-hmm.
they have more competitive metrics and indices than girls. And they tend to align their extracurricular activities more with their major interest and what they're envisioning as their career or professional interest. So girls, and again, this is generalization, but girls tend to be more open-minded, more interdisciplinary. They tend to see more possibilities of directions that their talent and ability might take them. So they don't write they write applications that are rich in those qualities. They're rich in diversity of intellectual interests, and in community building ways of using their brain power. Their activities tend to be, even if they're applying to civil engineering and they're in the same pool as a guy, their applications are very different. And the guys tend to have more of these kind of resumes of STEM activities and products, that they've built in their basements. They've been tinkering. They got all the reinforcement when they were 5 to 10 years old for tinkering at the workbench, with their granddad, or dismantling the computer and ordering the parts, on Amazon and building the hard drive again. And the girls are much, at least from my experience, I'm not reading about a lot of girls that are living their childhood girl lives like that. And some of it is just what goes on in society and the role models that are influencing children and gender stuff that's going on early. But they look really different when they write an application. And the boys, especially in business and engineering, have more credentials kind of in their application that selective colleges look for if they are admitting to a division of study. And this is why I feel the article was a little shallow, especially the information about some schools like Brandeis, where the observations were too shallow for my
Well,
liking.
also when you look at Pitzer and Vassar were women's colleges.
Right.
And we know that women's colleges historically have more women's out. I mean, it just makes sense. Grandma went, and Pitzer didn't stay single gender very long because, of course, it was just birthed in the early '60s, and by the late '60s, they'd already gone co-ed. But
right.
But still, it's not. Didn't escape my notice that two of the schools that we see it all the time. The schools, that whether it was Connecticut College or Kenyon, or we could go on and on with all the schools that were at one time women's colleges. They tend to have more women applicants, and that makes sense historically. I have a question for you, though, based on something that you said. I thought your last points were very astute. So when you talk about the gender differences, is this something that gets covered at all in any of the schools you've worked at in the file reading training? You know how schools are always doing bias training and sensitizing people to that, or is this just observations that you've been able to make given the fact that you've literally been in the business since the late 70s? I mean, that's a 40 plus year career to amass a lot of experiences. Or do you feel that would a newer rep be told these things at all as part of file reading training? And that's not just, you've read at multiple schools. So pulling, you can draw off other schools, not just where you're at now.
Yes, it is part of training. And what I always find interesting is, so as a file reader now, where are we looking for more gender parity? And again, it's not, when we read applications, it's not like we have a different set of statistics for girls than we do for boys based on the major, but we know which fields of study at an institution are significantly tipped. We also know which academic programs are not attracting other kinds of diversity, where we need to be especially thoughtful.
Can you comment a little bit more on that? I think that'd be of interest to our listener if you could give an example.
Well, so for example, two of the universities I've read for in the last 5 years have exceptionally strong STEM programs and whatever. So a lot of girls they'll apply to the schools of engineering with a major choice of biomedical. For some reason, any of the bio STEM fields, and colleges have lots of different ones. There's biotechnology, there's even biochemistry gets more female interest than plain old chemistry.
So Susan, I was smiling because just looking at recent stats, like Purdue, 54% women in biomedical, Penn State, 54% women in biomedical. Then you go and look at something like aerospace, and I did a big number on this. They had 20 females out of 225.
Yep.
And you saw it in most of the engineerings, most of them, but when it was in the bio, and the same data for Purdue and you're in other schools as well.
And I think, Mark, that goes back to what we were saying earlier about girls growing up kind of with not just different brain architecture, but different sociological influences, that the building engineering and computer science fields that are predicated on tinkering, that's the term everybody uses, right? That idea of being able to problem solve through small, I've heard it described, I'm not going to remember, but the small manipulation of informational pieces, and is something that look at the difference between Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Look at the merit badges. I read a fabulous article about, going back to the 1950s and how it's only been very recently that Girl Scouts, and of course now it's Scouts, period. We're losing some of the gender divisions there, but how Boy Scouts had all the technical, merit badges, and girls had not just home economics, but all the helping merit badges.
I mean, it's a fascinating conversation because it's that nature nurture,
I know.
like how much of it is socialization,
But we have changed it for girls. This is the good news, is that we've got 40 years of data now that have changed this for young women. So the interesting thing now is, so we're seeing the women moving into the applicant pools of professional schools at the undergraduate level, business and engineering for the most part. And
pre-med has been a big change. I mean,
Yes.
Dave literally credits the reduction of hours in residency to women coming into the medical profession. Back when he went through his training, it was work that 100-hour week, grind it out, tough it out.
Yep.
And then women came in and brought much more humanity.
That's
and
right.
forced the profession to change its training.
And it happened first in the medical field before the engineering field, because first of all, there was a tremendous deficit, but also it was accessible through the liberal arts. Pre-med has always been an accessible to liberal arts, whereas engineering and business less so at the undergraduate level.
A little more old boyish too.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where else we see many fewer female applicants. Civil engineering, women are going into environmental engineering, again, the bioengineering fields. Environmental engineering has been very hospitable to women, again, because it's interdisciplinary in a lot of ways, but that's where we see a lot of more female applicants. Mechanical, I would say, I think robotics on the high school level has done a lot for women, as high schools, particularly through VEX robotics and FIRST robotics, have made a tremendous point of having access for girls. Girls Who Code and other groups like that are starting to change that in computer science, getting much earlier exposure for girls. There's a wonderful new business organization, Girls Who Invest, which has been designed on the Girls Who Code model for getting girls interested in finance and banking in middle school and learning how to maybe negotiate high school a little differently if they develop an interest in that. I think the point you made earlier that, some colleges are just going to have to work harder to attract men, and some are going to have to work harder to attract women. Some of it is a legacy that will change slowly over time, but they're just the applicant pools are going to be tipped.
And I'm glad you're bringing up the other side too, because you look at fashion design, 95% female, elementary teacher, still nursing, very female. I know your Hamilton, he was a hot ticket at Villanova.
I know.
That's got a strong nursing program, and they were so happy to get a strong male like him coming in that program.
But these are. So do boys get into some programs because there's so few of them, if their credentials are a little less spectacular? And is that fair? Well, women have been on the other end of that for a century or more, where women have been told they weren't smart enough. They were just going to go into a field only to step out and raise children, and the money that was spent on educating them was going to be wasted. It's like, excuse me, we're still fighting some of that, but it's just going to take time to change. We need men desperately in education. Abbott Elementary, one of my favorite shows on TV, they raise this all the time about the influence that through humor that men have of teachers of small children. So should men be recruited a little bit more heavily for these programs? Of course, just as women need to be recruited heavily in areas where they are underrepresented. Do they receive gross favoritism in the admission process? It's not as big as people think.
Well, your point is well taken. No one's accepting and no one's admitting somebody that they don't have confidence can excel in the program.
That's right. That's right. And, Vassar, a college which I respect tremendously, having been a women's college, not having had a robust athletic program when they went co-ed. Skidmore, Wheaton College. Yeah.
Wheaton, yep.
Wheaton, Connecticut College. The advantages that students had, including especially men who went to these colleges in their early years, and still more tenured female faculty, more emotional intelligence nurtured in the students, whether they are STEM or humanities. It's taken a while, but the male sports programs are robust, at all of these schools now, but it took a long time.
Susan, we're going to have to make that the last word.
Wonderful.
We're pushing an hour, but it was so good. I didn't want to stop you. I think our listeners will enjoy it, and I'm already excited for your contributions next month. So thank you so much.
Bet. My pleasure,
I'm going to tap
Mark.
you for some more Speakpipe questions too. So I appreciate you helping out with that last week with your answer to that College Board question. So thank you for that as well.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Anything exciting on your weekend?
Oh, well, I have spent the last 7 days, I've seen 5 musicals.
Whoa! How many are your kids versus this is your entertainment?
My kids. 0 were my kids. Lily and I went to New York last weekend, and we saw 3 musicals in like 2 days. And then
I didn't even know you went to New York with Lily. I feel like we talk every day. How could I not know that?
it was just like a quick trip. And then I have season tickets for the musical theater venue in Durham, and so Lily and I saw the Book of Mormon on Thursday. And then last but not least, I attended the Durham Academy presentation of Chicago Teen Edition last night. So, I'm not going to be able to see a musical till March 4th, so I don't know how I'm going to cope.
Whoa, you're an addict. So which was the best one you saw in New York? What's your recommended resource musical for our listeners?
Well, we saw, it depends on what you want. Like for like a new kind of creative poppy musical, we saw Anne Juliet, which they make the plot so that Juliet doesn't die and then she goes out and lives her life, but they reimagine a lot of pop classics and repurpose them in this musical. And so that was really a lot of fun. But we did see the new musical, Some Like It Hot, which is all new material, and it was perfect. I mean, it was just like a perfect musical, the lighting, the dancing, the singing. There was a chase scene done entirely in tap dance that blew our minds. So If I had to pick one musical, I'd pick Some Like It Hot.
Well, my musical knowledge is less than my movie knowledge, so that's big. I saw one musical with my kids that they still rave about. We took the train in Philadelphia. What are like the most famous ones?
Well, like Wicked.
No, it wasn't Wicked. I've heard of that. I know if I hadn't heard of that, I was like, leave the planet, right? No, I can't believe I can't remember this because just recently my niece took her husband and it was like to Chicago and they were raving about it. It's like famous. So listen, I don't want to bore our listeners with this anymore. No. I'll report back. Yeah, and Mark, I'll start making a list of recommended musicals for you to attend. Well, this might impress you a little. I at least told my kids I would treat them to go see Hamilton. So at least told them I would pay for them.
You never have seen Hamilton yet?
Come on, I haven't seen any of these. I'm a sports guy.
Oh my gosh, Mark. Yeah. Well,
there's always a football or basketball game on that's going to trump a musical for me.
Hamilton is
let's get to our listeners before we lose every listener that we have.
Yes, sorry, listeners. It's my fault.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we are going to stop talking about musical theater and start talking about questions. And our first question comes from Esther from Tennessee.
Hello, this is Esther from Tennessee. Your podcast has been so helpful, and thanks to all of your great advice, my high school senior has received quite a few offers from some fantastic colleges. My question is about the timing of when to let colleges know that your student is no longer interested. We've heard stories about some colleges offering more scholarship money and grant aid as the May 1st decision deadline approaches. So is it best to keep all offers on the table until May 1st? At the same time, we don't want to deprive other students of a coveted spot at a college that no longer seems like a good fit for our daughter. Any advice about the timing of turning down college offers would be appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's actually a really good question. I appreciate Esther asking it for a few reasons. One, I definitely think a lot of other people were like, oh, yeah, good question. And they can relate to that. But I also just appreciate the consideration sort of in the question, like trying to think about others and what's best for others. And am I holding a spot that should go to someone else? So I want to answer this from a few different perspectives. So one of the things we used to say in admissions was, the second best thing to a yes is a quick no. In other words, like it is very helpful to schools to know if you're not going to come. Now, it doesn't quite work the way a lot of people think. So what do I mean by that? Let's say a school has $10 million of financial aid. They don't give away $10 million of financial aid if, like in terms of their offers, if that's their budget. So it's not a one-for-one. So it's not like if you got a $30,000 financial aid offer and you're sitting on it and you're not going to come. It's not like you're keeping another person in a direct one-for-one way. What they'll do is they'll look at their yield rates. So let's say it's a school that gets 1 out of 4 kids in regular admission. So they wouldn't necessarily say 10 million times 4 is 40 million. So we'll go out with 40 because like if you have a year where your yield is 33%, not 25, like that's when you lose your job. Right. But they're also not going to go with 10,000 either. Like they might go out with 25,000 or 30,000, based on past traditional thing, right? Because it's harder to get people, honestly, if you waitlist them and then you try to pull them off versus if you lead first. Like the most selective schools can get away with that because people are banging down the drums to go there, but most schools can't get away with that. Like if you waitlist a kid, they didn't feel the love, they're going to go somewhere where they got the love. So normally you would like to be able to not waitlist, but you also can't shoot your budget. So that's one thing that I'll say. Now, the part about Esther's question, though, that I really wanted to draw attention to is, so part of her said that if you're not interested, should you cut a school loose and let them know you're not coming to free money up for somebody else? And that in of itself, I would say absolutely. I mean, I've been doing this with all my students. So going over them, if you tell me there's you're not going either because you're already in a school that you like more, then let them know. Please do it. Do it in writing. I also tell them if you've been working individually with a rep, meaning if there's any type of individual personal relationship that you've had with somebody, they could have met you at a fair, they could have visited your school, they could have just chatted with you in the conference room on a visit, then reach out directly to them. If you didn't do it, have a relationship with a rep at all, then you can just send in writing to the main admissions email address. Just follow their instructions because a lot of schools want you to use their school portal or they have another system. So please follow their instructions to the T. I also tell them, and this is a really, really hard thing, but I'm very sensitive to this because when I was doing boarding school admissions, I was over all of our surveys. I was over our refusal surveys. We find out why people refused us. I was over our enrollment surveys, why they selected us. What we call the DNCP survey, did not complete the process. Why did you stop and why did you start? And then if we ever had someone leave, attrition. So I was over all of that for at least 3 years. And I really wanted to get that valuable information, especially on refusals, because you prepare a refusal report at the end of the year, and then you examine all the reasons, and then you analyze and say, is there something we can do better? So, for example, like we were a Friend school or a Quaker school. So if someone said, the Quaker thing, I wasn't feeling that, then we would be, you know what, it just wasn't a match. But if they said, like, I didn't like the tour guide, then, we had a meal in the dining room and the food sucked. Like, okay, these are things we need to, in fact, that exact thing happened. And I remember having a meeting with the business manager, and he was like, we could spend whatever, $500,000 more to upgrade our food. If I need to hear from more than just you, the powers that be. So you always, it was just me spouting off. But so that's very valuable. So I tell families, not only should you refuse, do it politely. Thank them so much for their offer. Tell them where you're going and why you're going there. And most of the time people don't want to do that because they feel like, I don't want to hurt their feelings, And I used to literally, people would blow you off with an answer and I would follow up. Please tell us the real reason. Okay, here's the reason. So you don't realize that you're actually really helping them if you let them know like where you went and why you went where you went. So I tell them that. Now, here's the part of Esther's question, though, that gave me pause. So she's referring to the fact that she's heard of schools making a better offer, which does sometimes happen. So she's like, should we wait because maybe they'll make a better offer? And this is what I would say. If you're turning down a school because they may make a better offer, then you're not ready to turn it down yet.
Right.
Does that make sense? So so you should be turning down a school because I already know, like, even if you make a better offer, I'm going to go to one of the ones I already have. If an extra $5,000 could change your decision, then hold off, because sometimes that does happen. I have a few more things to say, but I'm tired of my voice and I don't want to get Vanna over there. So.
Oh my goodness! You say one thing, I'm
never going to forget that.
Poor Vanna White. She works so hard.
I don't think she's poor.
I think she's fine. She's doing just fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about her. But I think that Esther makes a really good point, because I think if you are thinking, okay, well, if such and such school made me a good offer, I might consider it, then you shouldn't turn them down. You should keep playing the game, because they're still in the mix, right? It's still a possibility. But if, there are someone that your child is like, just knows that they have schools that they can afford, that they've gotten into, that they like better than the other schools, and they're definitely not going there, no matter how much money they got, then, it's time to say goodbye, I think.
Now, there is one thing I'll introduce in this conversation, which, I try to do this with nuance, because it's not an iron, clad rule. But the schools that have to throw money at you late in order to get you to come, sometimes there's a reason they have to do that. Sometimes there's schools that are not going to meet their enrollment goals. And those are the times when schools are most likely to get aggressive. Because a lot of times the mindset that they can have is, well, we have a certain amount of fixed cost to run an institution that we're going to have no matter what, right? We're not changing professor salaries.
Right.
You've probably heard me say this before. For every school, professors and staff and admin salaries and benefits is your biggest line item by far. Mm-hmm. So you're fixed into all of your costs related to like salaries and benefits for all your staff. You're fixed into a lot of other things that, whatever it's costing you to run your health centers and the basic electricity and all those type of so you have like tons of fixed fees. So there are some schools, especially ones that think they may open in the fall and be under enrolled, that will have a mindset of, like, if we got $20,000 out of this family, like, we really wanted 35, but it's still worth it for us to do it, because our actual cost to like feed them, like the extent to which they'll add appreciable differences to our cost is not like what we were hoping to get from them. And those are schools that are not in really a strong place. And so, like, I always tell people, go to a place that's affordable, but this is not a commodity when it comes to education. And I tell people to treat it the same way you kind of would about a doctor. Like, something as important as your health, you wouldn't necessarily just pick your doctor based on who is the absolute cheapest.
Right.
Like, most people wouldn't do that for things that are important to them, right? And so sometimes it's been my experience that the schools that throw money late into the year, especially if it's like August at people, or even July, and especially when you just get money and you don't even ask for it, they're usually just not in a really healthy place. And so that's another factor that I think should be, added to the conversation.
Absolutely. Right. So look at the money that comes in with a discerning eye. Right.
Yeah.
And think about, why does the school offer me this extra money now, and what is going on there?
Yeah, and this beyond the scope of this conversation, but I want at some point really come back to this because I've touched on it, but I haven't done a deep dive. I'm really big on people going through a very comprehensive assessment of what they can afford, like in advance. And there's a lot involved in that assessment. It's not just, oh, I can pay 30,000, I can pay 50,000. Like it's beyond the scope of this. I think I did this when we did our book chapter back when we were going through. Boy, it feels like ancient history. Remember my book back in the day?
Oh, that's right. You wrote a book, didn't you? No wonder you haven't been to musicals. You're writing a book.
Well, you're cutting me some slack. That was 2017. Yeah. But no, I didn't ever went to bed before 4 a.m. when I was doing that project. But yeah, I think that's the last time I remember us going through the comprehensive assessment on what you can afford. But we should come back to that because there's some important ways of doing that are not the way people calculate it. But it's important to kind of have a number. And then you're asking yourself, like, okay, can I afford this? Is it in my budget? And I would encourage people not to be dissuaded by an offer from a school that you really didn't want to go to if you have an affordable offer for a school. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I almost said Vanna. Well, Lisa, is that my new nickname for you? Can I get away with that?
That's passive aggressive, I think.
No, it's not. It's endearment.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think you answered the question extremely well, and I wish Esther and her student the best of luck in making what sounds like is going to be a decision from a lot of great options.
Yep. Thanks, Esther.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hopefully you've enjoyed the Ronne Turner interview as much as I enjoyed conducting it. And in our third and final part, Ronne will discuss how the student's high school is evaluated. She also talks about what WashU looks for when they read a file. She specifically talks about demonstrated interest and how that has changed over the years, how they evaluate demonstrated interest. She discusses some institutional priorities WashU has when discussing their Here and Next campaign. And she also shares what WashU can do better. And of course, I put her on the hot seat, so listen and enjoy. I like to ask about admission file rating systems because it oftentimes sort of shows some of the priorities or at least the rubrics through which, you do evaluation. So what would WashU's admission file rating system be? Or what are your main categories in your rating scale?
So I do want to mention that we do committee-based evaluation. So we have 2 staff members reading. And one of the reasons we did that is to try to reduce bias, unconscious bias. But when we're reading an application, the first and the most important thing, obviously, is the academic performance, how well the student has done, how well prepared they are for the program that they're interested in studying. That's really important. We also are looking at involvements, but we're paying particular attention to looking at the personal qualities and community qualities that kind of align with the personality of WashU. So when we're reading a recommendation, we want to know that the student works hard, that the student cares about their academics, but we also want to know how that student treats others around them. And we learn that a lot from teacher recommendations. So, the involvements that students have, the things that they're interested in, how they spend their time, all of those things are important to us. And so, those are the things that I think are really important to us. Really, those community involvements, their personal qualities are the things that we will distinguish one applicant from another.
Now, some time ago, you made an announcement that WashU would no longer be factoring demonstrated interest into admissions decisions. And I always like to have that explained because early decision in and of itself is a demonstrated form of demonstrated interest. So tell me what that means, what change occurred, what are you doing differently than what you did before?
Yeah, so for us, And so sometimes I wonder if that was the right decision, frankly. But for us, we would look at whether or not a student had visited campus.
Sure.
That was a really important piece of our use of how we use demonstrated interest. And because as a result of the pandemic, when students couldn't visit, we realized that, we were able to make really good decisions without that information. And so we decided that we would eliminate that because it wasn't as equitable, because not all students have the opportunity to visit an institution. And so for us, it was about the visit. It was also about those students who were constantly emailing our admissions officers and, with updates, with no real questions, but just trying to
score DI points.
Score DI points.
Right.
And for those students who are well-resourced and knew about demonstrated interest, it was putting undue stress on them, right? And for those students who aren't well-resourced and didn't know and weren't able to visit, it wasn't necessarily a fair process for those students. So we eliminated DI in that vein. But you are absolutely right. We have early decision 1, we have early decision 2, and those are the ultimate demonstrations of interest. But our philosophy on early decision is that students really need to do their homework and understand if WashU is a good fit. And those are the only students who should be applying early. And it is a bit of a contradiction, but it's a contradiction that I'm okay with at this particular point in WashU's admissions history.
Well, I understand it because, first of all, I did admissions, but also, the other side of it is people are applying to 20 schools. It's, predicting yield is very challenging, and you have multiple stakeholders that you have to please, and get the need to, be able to predict yield and lock in people in various constituencies to have a balanced class. So there's a reason why all your competitors private school pretty much do it, and the few that don't still usually do single choice early action, and still to get some read on someone's interest. So I understand that. Now, you said something that was really transparent. You said you wonder if it was the right decision. Is that because it is a little bit harder to predict yield, removing some of the metrics that you once used?
No, I said that because we want students to explore us and visit us if they can. And I worry that because we no longer have demonstrated interest, we may not be having as many students and their families putting us on their list to visit.
That makes sense.
Because once you get to know us, people fall in love with us. And I just want to make sure that they are still looking at us. And
that might sound like a pompous statement, but it's really true. Like, your place is very impressive. And I not only say that, but my students that come away from visiting, they usually have the wow factor. So I think it's just honesty when you say that.
I didn't mean to sound pompous. I'm rarely accused of sounding pompous, but it's because we are in the Midwest. A lot of people fly over us.
Over country.
We just want people to visit us and get to know us.
Sure. What are some institutional priorities of WashU? You've already told us one: commitment to access and serving people of all demographics. Any others that you can share?
Yeah, we just announced a 10-year strategic plan. Typically, when you have a new chancellor and a new provost, there's a strategic plan, and ours is called Here and Next. And it was approved by the board in May, and there was a big launch in the fall. And our priorities are around research, obviously people and community. We are committed to continuing to do great research and great scholarship with our faculty and being creative, and to also be more global. We're interested in making sure that we are a community partner in the city of St. Louis and our surrounding community. So that's something that is really important to us, being a good neighbor. And you heard from an admissions perspective, continuing to diversify, serve underrepresented students of color, first generation, Pell, rural, moderate income. We're really, which is harder to get at, but we want to be a place that is socioeconomically diverse in all economic ranges. And so we're trying to do a better job of recruiting and enrolling moderate income students as well.
Yeah, and it's not that upper income families aren't important. It's just that those are the ones that will tend to find you on their own. They'll either work with consultants or they're in private schools or they have the ability to travel. And so it's not like, you don't want that demographic, but that demographic finds you anyway. Would that be fair to say?
That is fair to say, and I'm really glad that you said that, because I don't want students who are coming from more well-resourced backgrounds to think that they're not welcome at WashU, because they are. You are. We're visiting private high schools, speaking at independent schools, going, we have a global national recruitment strategy, but we may pay a little bit more attention in our recruitment activities to those students, as you say, who don't find us as easily.
Great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, before I share our recommended resource for episode 305, I want you to know that the Common App just announced literally on Tuesday, February 27th, that they will have the exact same 7 prompts as last year. So if you're waiting to see the prompts before you worked on your personal statement, no excuses anymore. Get to it. Okay, friends, our recommended resource for episode 305 is the cost calculator that MEFA uses. And MEFA will be on our podcast. A couple of fantastic representatives that work for MEFA will be on our podcast coming up in April. But I didn't want to wait then for you to learn about their cost calculator, because AIDA words are very confusing. And I strongly recommend you use a cost calculator. So you can just go to mefa.org/cost-calculator, or you can just Google MEFA, MEFA cost calculator, and it'll pull it up. What you'll see is a space for 6 different schools. And I really like it because it has a space for all your annual costs like tuition and fees, food and housing, books and supplies, health insurance, other costs. And then it has all the free money that you've gotten from the school, whether that's a Pell Grant, SCOG grant, state grant, or college scholarships or outside scholarships. And then it has a place for the loan information and then other things such as work study and other resources. And one thing I really like about theirs is you can take your cursor over the letter I, and it will give you more information. But the reason why you need to do this is because AIDA awards very often are completely different from one school to the next. They'll exclude things that should be on. And so you really want to make sure that you're comparing every single expense and you're including every source of income. This will make sure that you don't miss something just because the school doesn't include something. So a recommended resource is MEFA's College Cost Calculator. There's some other good ones out there as well, but this is one I really like. We'll now return to the final part of my interview with Ronne Turner. So I can't have a total softball interview here, Ronne. I can't have a total love fest. I have to have, showing my age here, but I have to have a little Tim Russert in me here. So what does WashU need to improve? What are you not doing as well as you feel you could be doing?
So we worry about stress levels for students coming from high school into campus, and how we can clarify for students that they don't need to do everything to be successful in life. While we are flexible and we have a lot of students that have a major or a double major or a minor, we sometimes scratch our head as to why students want to do that. And so we're trying to get the point out to students that you don't have to do all of these things to achieve your goal. Like many institutions around the country, we are concerned about our infrastructure for mental health, although we just launched a new program last year where if a student needs to speak with someone and they're in crisis, we have a 24-hour hotline that can allow them to get that support. While we have made strides in diversifying our undergraduate student body, we're still working on getting that experiential equity and ensuring that students on campus have all the opportunities that they can that will enrich and accelerate their experiences. Right now, we are in the midst of reimagining our career services unit. We had some career services in separate divisions, and we've just hired a wonderful new associate vice chancellor of career services, and she is working hard right now on creating one campus career service unit that is supporting students, that is integrated with the faculty and academics, so that students understand what they're doing, what they're learning, and how that relates to career services. We also want this university-wide career center so that we can strengthen our relationships with employers. So they're not coming to see Olin students and then on a different day coming to see engineering students, but they're coming to WashU to serve and see all of our students. So those are some of the things we're working on.
Great. So we're about to transition to the lightning round. Is there anything you didn't say about WashU that you want to say? Because we're sort of exiting out the WashU part here.
I just want to invite your audience to explore us, come get to know us. We'd love to talk with you about your goals and figure out if WashU is a great fit.
Awesome. So my first question for you, and I should tell our listeners, Ronne and I were talking before we got in. She says, "What's this lightning round?" Because I don't send any advance notice on this. It's just they have to trust me here. So what's a hobby that Ronne has?
I hate these types of questions. I'm just going to tell you.
Well, I love your transparency.
I'm really bad at this. I am the type of person that may dabble in something for a little while and then try something else. So I may crochet for a little while, or knit for a little while, or cook for a little while. So I don't have, this single.
Well, that's okay.
Hobby.
You gave me 3.
Yeah.
That counts.
Yeah.
What's something on your bucket list?
I just want to travel more around the world.
Anywhere in particular you want to get to?
I'd like to get to Africa. I'd like to get to Italy. Stanley Tucci's show has gotten me really eager to get to Italy.
Sounds good. All right. You have a wealthy relative, and they come out of the blue, and they want to buy you a car, and you can pick any car off the lot. Price is not a factor. What is Ronne going to drive?
I know I'm supposed to say, one of the new electric cars, but if it could be an electric car that is that Infinity, like the big Infinity, I would love that one.
There you go. All right, last 2. What's a book that you think would be a really good book for parents to read? Our audience is mostly parents, 10% are college counselors, but they're usually parents as well. Some students listen, but, students have a lot of, stuff they can do these days that's longer than a 2-hour podcast, faster than a 2-hour podcast like TikTok. But mostly parents are listeners. So what's a book that you think would be a good book for parents to read?
Darn it. I'm looking on my shelf to see if I can find the book. There was this great book that my team and I read last year. It really gave us a great understanding of financial aid, the history of financial aid. It wasn't all. It was a little bit. Some of it was a little bit out of context as it relates to debt. But it was a really great book for us, and I just can't remember the name of it. Another book that my team that we all read together, I don't know if your audience would want to read it, is The Privileged Poor.
No, yeah, that's a good book.
But that was a good book. Mm-hmm. But in terms of those general how to get into college books, I defer to you.
Well, actually, I wasn't even asking about that. The Privileged Poor is a great book. It's more any book like that at all. Speaking of financial aid, I don't know if you know this, but probably we've had about 130 interviews on the podcast. But one of our first 15 was Michael Runowitz.
Michael Runowitz. He is an incredible financial aid professional. And
isn't he?
love working with him.
He is
has such a great
awesome.
heart. He is awesome. His goal is to make WashU affordable within the law and
Hmm.
federal regulations to make WashU possible for students. So he's a great team member.
He spoke to us, when I was at the counselor fly-in. And I was so impressed with him then that we kept in touch. And then when we had the podcast, we've had multiple financial aid professionals come on, but he was our first. And I keep in touch with him again. He's supposed to make an encore appearance, so we're looking forward to that.
Ask him; he'll be happy to do it. He's been doing a lot of speaking around the country recently.
So my last question for you is your best advice for students and parents.
So I'm going to admit something. I have a daughter who's a high school junior.
I heard you say that.
And so the advice that I'm going to give is the advice that I am really trying to follow. That
Can I guess? Let it be
Sure.
the student's journey and not the parents, and let it be their experience, and try to let student in the driver's seat, parent in the passenger seat.
Yeah, that is it, and helping students sort of recognize the phrase that I use, which I borrowed from a colleague when I was at Northeastern, curbs, helping students avoid those curbs and cliffs. Those cliffs are those things that they have a harder time recovering from, and then the curbs, you can recover from it. It's a lesson that they will learn, but allowing them to experience the process and remembering to remind your students to be their authentic selves. We don't want them to put on a show for us. We want them to tell us who they really are. And
that's really hard in working with
that.
students.
They forget it, and it's hard. Yeah.
It's really hard because their mindset is almost like someone trying to get a job. Like, what do I need to tell them to get the job? I'm trying to get the job, and so
Right.
they because they always ask those questions, like, what would be better to do in the summer? What would look better? You always have to push them back to their authentic self in counseling. And then, and it's a challenge. And I understand why it's a challenge, because you are trying to get in and accomplish something. So it makes sense to think, well, if I'm trying to accomplish something, does this help more than this?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right on that. And that's something that I have to remind myself. What I'm trying to do is encourage my daughter in the things that she likes and those positive things, and not focus so much on the things that I know from the work that I do might make it a bit more challenging for her. But I know that she's going to be fine. And one of the things that I tell parents and students, folks are so worried about the name brand institution or the place that's most popular and highly selective that you forget about making an academic match. And when I say academic match, I'm not just talking about the major. I'm talking about the faculty expectations, the work, the rigor, the pace at that institution. And some students need an environment that is a little bit more supportive and a little bit slower. Some students are well prepared and they're ready to jump in and keep racing. I'll say this and then I'll stop. When I was in high school, we had two valedictorians. One went off to the Ivy League. The other one got into an Ivy League institution and made the decision not to go to an Ivy League institution. She knew she was going to get a good education, but she wanted to really experience that institution. And she felt going to a place that was going to keep her running as opposed to experiencing was not a good fit for her. And I admire that. And I hope that as a parent, that I'm going to allow my child to think about the experience itself, as opposed to just the race of getting through.
Well, that's great. That's great. And let's close with that. That's awesome. So, Ronne, for someone who is really intrigued and really interested and they want to know more about WashU, what do you recommend are the next steps?
Visit our website, find out more about our online opportunities to explore, as well as our in-person opportunities to explore. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have questions. I can put you in touch with your admissions representative or others on campus who may be able to answer questions if I am not able to do that for you. But just get to know us and take the time to explore.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you could say hi to Michael for me. Is Valencia still with you?
Valencia is no longer with us. She left us this summer. She's no longer working for us. That didn't sound right the other way I phrased it.
She was another awesome person in your office that I worked really closely with. So keep up the great work. And thank you so much for spending an hour of your time with us. I know you're really busy. And for those of you who don't know this, Ronne and I are literally recording this when early decisions for WashU come out in like 2 hours. So it's really nice of her on such a busy time to spend an hour of your time. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation. This was fun.
My pleasure.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, last week you heard the first part. Now it's time for the second part. All right, then we have the School of Business, and this is the most popular one by far. Such a high percentage of students actually do major in business here. The program, everybody raved about the professors. So this was founded in 1976 as the Alfred North Whitehead College for Lifetime Learning. So the School of Business really began as an experiment in providing educational services to working adults in Southern California, but it was so successful that they formed an official School of Business in 2001. And currently, almost 35% of students major in business. And so they have 68 professors altogether that are committed to the business department. And they have other regional campuses too. So obviously the main campus is Redlands, but they have campuses in Burbank, in Orange County, in Riverside, in San Diego, just actually several others that I won't even mention them all. And they're planning a new campus in Marin County as well. So they have a lot of different degrees. They have business. They have a BS in management, and they have lots of different MBA programs, daytime, evening, online programs, and then concentrations in analytics, marketing, global business, finance, organization, and information, and MS in information technology. So those programs are fantastic. And then we have to go back to really the oldest program, which is the School of Education. And so, I mean, this was founded in 1924. And as of 2006, their graduate program had 516 students with 17 full-time professors and 30 adjunct professors. So a lot of this program is geared toward the working professional and the way in which they've got it set up. But they partner with the College of Arts and Sciences for their undergraduate students to give them their teaching credentials. But when you go back and look at the history of Redlands, education was really at the heart of their founding. And so they offer a lot in this. They offer educational specialists, teaching credentials, pupil personal services, school counseling, and then they get into other things, and I won't even mention them all, but they even have a doctorate in leadership. And it's an EDD degree, which is Leadership for Educational Justice. And it's their only doctoral program. So anytime you kind of see an only doctoral program, that's a strong program. It's kind of grounded in social justice in learning. So that's really cool. I probably should also mention their graduate degree of theology. That's a multi-faith interdisciplinary program. It's a merger between San Francisco Theological Seminary and the University of Redlands that happened in 2019. There's a brand new partnership that is really getting people excited, and it's with the Presidio Graduate School. They have an MBA and an MPA, and it's also a 4+1, and that's mostly environmental studies, but it's also can be business. So environmental studies and environmental science is a really strong program here. Another really strong program is speech and language pathology. Like that's one of their top programs, and jobs are just booming in California for that. And then another one that's really strong is public policy analysis. In the past, that had been more grad level, and now they're bringing public policy to the undergrad. And then probably the program that they emphasize the most for being the newest is their new esports program. So that's booming and that's new, and they're really excited. And apparently they got some real hotshot person that's nationally renowned to come in and lead that. And so they also have Maymesters. And so you go fall semester, spring semester, and then they have these 1 month Maymesters, and people go all over for these, like Sacramento, DC. Okay, I'm gonna need help. I always mess this up. How can I?
The Galapagos? The Galapagos
I never
Islands?
can say that word. All the way back to when I was at Westtown. A lot of the kids used to go there for their summers, and I could never get the word right. So I just give it up hope on that. And Linda, you want to talk about a program too that attracted your attention?
Yeah, they have a new human animal studies program, and it's one of only about 10 or so in the country. So they call it HAST, and it's an interdisciplinary field looking at the relationships between humans and non-human animals. And of course, I love animals, so that caught my attention. But this program, it's an undergraduate degree. There's an experiential component of it. Every student will do a practicum where they're working hands-on with animals. And this is a degree where students could go on to veterinarian school, could work on policy as it relates to animals, conservation. And we're all, the pet industry is booming. So it's kind of an unusual program. So if somebody is really looking to explore that field, Redlands sounds like a great place.
Yeah, thanks, Linda, for that. And just overall, there's just so much creativity here. So let me give you a few stats, and then I'm going to get into who I recommend for it. And I'm going to share a couple of new things that I didn't share so far when I say who I recommend. So 2,200 students, 28% are student athletes, and they're in the SIAC conference, which is the same as mostly all the other schools we've been talking about so far in Southern California, because these are all like Division III schools. Whether it's the Claremonts, and we talked about that before, with Pitzer and Pomona being one school, and then also Claremont, McKenna, Harvey Mudd, and Scripps forming a team, but other places as well, like Occidental and Whittier, and one school we haven't talked about, Laverne, and Caltech. So they're all together in that conference. So here's an interesting thing. 25% of the students are Greek, but they're all independent Greek organizations, so not part of the national Greek organizations. They've had 27 Fulbrights since 2008. And that just shows their commitment to service. They also have 17 honor societies that are designed to foster student-faculty networking. And this is a school with a real commitment to first gen. So they were 33% first gen in 2018. They're now 48% first gen. So almost 1 out of every 2 students would be first gen. So certainly a place that first gen student would feel incredibly comfortable with, or if somebody else just really values socioeconomic diversity. I mean, that number sounds high, but that's more like the country. Like the school, I talked about Pomona being diverse a couple weeks ago, but really Pomona's diverse for an elite private school. It doesn't have anywhere near the socioeconomic diversity or even the Latinx diversity that a place like Redlands has. Like Redlands mirrors the country more. Pomona is diverse for a private, elite affluent school. So there's a difference there because there's so much more socioeconomic diversity here. And, not to say one is right or one is wrong, just differences. So there are a couple of things I want to say about financial aid programs they have, which are kind of nice. They have something called California Promise. So if you're Cal Grant eligible, which basically means you're from a California family and you have $120,000 or less in income, your first year tuition is free as long as you have a 3.5 GPA. And so they say, well, what about the second year? Do they whack you? So basically what will happen is you'll get the cost of living and you'll get the tuition increases. So that base amount that was covered will still be covered, but they typically go up about between 3 to 5%, like most schools, 3.5% on average. You'll pay that 3.5% increase, but you won't pay, that 55,000 tuition fee will be
Quite a
covered for you.
bargain.
Yeah. They also have something with the Pacific Northwest for Pell families, similar for a 3.5, and then any other place in the country, if you have a 3.5, your tuition is capped at $23,000. So you're basically coming in with like a $32,000 merit scholarship if you have a 3.5 GPA from any of the schools. So if you're thinking, wow, this looks awesome, but I don't feel like paying $80,000, well, guess what? You can take about 33,000 right off the top if your student has a 3.5, which is really, really nice. All right, let's talk about who I recommend. Well, one theme that you can't get away from at this school is it is a community of caring. This is a caring community. If you want to go to school in a caring community, you will feel it immediately, and it's genuine. It's also a place for innovative learners who like to design their own degree. So if you like that and you like that type of creativity, it's great. You want close relationships with professors, brilliant professors, but also caring professors. Everyone that I spoke to, gave the professors very high reviews, not only for subject matter expertise, but accessibility and caring. Strong sense of community, students who are committed to each other. It's got a little bit of a world changer, difference maker vibe. So if you like to be that world changer, difference maker, once again, I can't get away from this. People that want breathtaking beauty, those atmospherics are just absolutely incredible. They have a very, very spectacular career center. If that's important to you. And one of the things I love about their career center is that they are committed not just to helping current students there, but if you're a grad, you could be 55 years old and you want to make a career change, you graduated, they call them up and they'll work with you. Now, they're not the only one that does that, but not every school does that. So like you're part of the community, come on down. We'll help you. If you want a school that truly embraces racial, ethnic diversity, this school does that. They've got some very strong supports for mental health. So if that's important to you, they've set up a partnership with Timely Care. And within 2 to 3 minutes, someone's on the phone with you. Obviously, a school with a visionary president, that's important. Residence halls, if you like learning living communities, they have a real mix of residence hall. Like they've got East Hall for the athletes. They've got a couple different dorms for Johnson. North Hall is mostly for people that want to study global studies. Very strong study abroad. They also have a 4-year graduation commitment. And I love these schools that have 4-year graduation commitments. And so if you're not graduating in 4 years, then you can continue to take courses and you won't have to pay. And it's a really great way of knowing that your tuition is going to be capped and you don't have to worry, am I going to have to pay this for 6 years? So they're making that commitment to you. And I think I love it when schools do that. So that's something else. And I think you wanted to say something about that, didn't you, Lena?
Well, the 4-year guarantee is just amazing. Of course, there are points that students have to meet. There's a GPA requirement and that type of thing. But how they accomplish that is either by doing substitution if you find that you're not able to graduate in 4 years, or by waiving tuition fees. So it's terrific. I wish all schools had that 4-year guarantee.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the biggest fears that parents and families have oftentimes is...
Yes.
Am I in the hook for 4 years? That's already very challenging. But 6? I don't know if I can deal with that. Or 5. So there's another real marquee program that I didn't mention because I wanted to mention it in this context of who this is good for. And that is their Salzburg program. So this is students who want to go abroad. So they have this very unique Salzburg semester. And this thing's been around since 1960. It's an interdisciplinary curriculum in the arts and humanities in Austria. And so you're in Austria at I'm not going to be able to say this right because this is literally like a 22 syllable word, 22, not syllables, but yeah, 22 characters in this word. So Students reside in the Marca Tendero Scola, whatever that is, but it's a 500-year-old Renaissance building set amongst forest and meadows, overlooking Salzburg's historic center. And all you do is pay travel costs. All the other costs are built in. And they also have study abroads with up to 80 countries. Some other really well-known programs are France and Guatemala. If you want to go to friendly school, you want to go to a non-STEM oriented place, but they do have those strong programs like we've talked about already. Generous financial aid for merit offers, very active student body, service-oriented students. So here's the thing. Every student at Redlands is required to participate in community service activities, and they log a ridiculous number of hours altogether amongst their whole schools, like 120,000 community service hours. Like they have programs to the homeless and literacy programs, and there's a semester course on service that everybody has to take. So, I mean, if you want to be in a community that really values service and everybody's doing service, this could be your place. Very close advising. So you get your first year seminar professor, that's your advisor. And that actually starts before you actually arrive. And then here's another thing. If you want to be part of a sustainable farm, they have a sustainable farm on campus. Like this is the Orange Grove Center, oranges everywhere, but they grow their own grapes right there and all kinds of fruits and vegetables. They have a lot of carrots, and the local town uses the community food. So those are some of the things. Hands-on leadership experience, and I would say learning with pressure without grades in the Unique Johnston Center. And once again, that Esri that we talked about, they have 400 alumni alone that have gone through the Esri program. So strong, this is the name I was looking for, Linda, career and professional development program.
Very impressive.
Yeah. And they take care of people. They have a food pantry for people who are food insecure. They talked about someone who had no money, had no computer. They got her computer. Students interested in entrepreneurship. They have twice as many people as the national average that go into entrepreneurship. Schools, if you're looking for a place that's serious about DEI, just diversity, equity, and inclusion. Once again, I mentioned 39 trustees and all members of the cabinet have to go through training. So, you might think, okay, I kind of like this feedback because you provide nuance. So no place is heaven on earth. What would be the challenges? So I'll say one of the challenges is they're working off of a thinner budget. It's great that they give that much financial aid to everybody. But when you give that much financial aid to everybody, it doesn't give you as much of a budget to work on. Their endowment's not terrible, but it's not great either. And so that's something I'm watching. I think it's a great school, and I didn't sense the concerns I sense when I visit schools that this place is struggling. But, it's something just to keep an eye on is the finances. And as long as that enrollment numbers is fine, I think they'll be fine. And with this visionary president and these unique programs, I'm not concerned. But it's just something worth keeping an eye on. And the other thing is, if you need a designer school, this is not going to be a school that a lot of people have heard of. So that requires a certain amount of self-confidence. You have to know that I'm at a good school, and there will be a person that will judge you sometimes when you say the name and they haven't heard of it. And you have to be comfortable with that. And not everybody is, some are, some aren't. But that's something people have to be aware of. It's not a school that has high levels of wealth. And for some people, they want that. They want to go to a school where the person, around them their dad is the head of this company or that company. This is a school that's 48% first gen. And, Linda knows this, but we ask everybody in our questionnaire, like, what's the composition ideally of a student body that you might want from a racial ethnic standpoint? And everybody's different. We just help people, whatever. If they say they want 90% Caucasian, that's fine. We'll find schools like that for you. But, this school's 40% Hispanic, and that could be amazing for somebody, and for somebody else, maybe that might not feel as diverse as they might like. It's going to depend on the person. And then one other thing, I can't help but think of this dad I worked with a couple times who said, don't give my kid a school that's too social justice-y. So they're going to be social justice-y. And so if you're not into social justice, this might not be your cup of tea. But overall, I am incredibly impressed with this school. I would have been happy for either of my daughters to go to this school. I think it's a hidden gem. After I left, I called this family immediately, Linda, that I was working with that was in Southern California visiting schools, and I hadn't given them this school because I hadn't been. And you know what? It looks like she's going to go. She's admitted a bunch of places, and this is probably where she's going.
That's terrific.
So, yeah. Any final words from you?
Sounds like a great place for students who are interested in really taking control of their programs of study, and really unique programs. And I like how so much of it is cross-disciplinary. And of course, I love the mountains and the palm trees. So that's always good too.
So do I. Awesome. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks.
Okay, friends, on Monday's episode, first of all, we'll have our higher ed updates, scour the country and let you know what's going on in the world of higher ed. And guess what? No question from a listener. We had 10 in the kitty when we started going to the Monday, Thursday rotation, and we have almost caught up. We have 3 left. So if you want to send in more Speakpipe questions, we could definitely use them. But then we'll have our final part with Lisa's interview with Kirby McKilliar, and you do not want to miss this final part. This is an interview, in my opinion, that just got getting better and better, like fine wine. So the second was even better than the first. And this is my personal favorite part. So make sure you tune in for that. And friends, I want to leave you with some of the wisdom Chris Gruber shared when I interviewed him, and I asked him what his advice was for parents. All right, last question. Your best, well, it's really 2, but your best advice for students? I'm going to give you 3 because you're...
Oh, you keep changing the number. What's the deal here? Come on, you're a professional interviewer. What are you doing?
Being unprofessional. Best advice to students, parents, and college counselors.
Yeah. I think for students, one is going to be appreciate that you have more control of this process than you ever think. You do. There's so much of it that you can shape. Do things early, do things in a timely fashion, and you're going to do very, very well. And know that there's not just one place. I think there are a variety of places that you can go to. Treat it as though it's almost an additional course. Spend some good time on it. Because I think where you spend your next 4 years can be a powerful, powerful thing for you. So there's one. To the parents, I think students feel a lot of pressure in this process. So the greatest thing to do is tell your students right now, before they're starting the college search process, that you're proud of them. And it will have nothing to do with the label that you put on the back of the car, or the sticker, or the sweatshirt, or the hat that you ultimately end up wearing down the road. You're proud now, and it doesn't have to do with where they're getting into college. And with counselors, it's always going to be, know that we're in this together. We are partners, we are colleagues, and we are here to serve. And I know that there's a lot of places that you need to be managing and understanding, but let us know how we can help you. We're ready to do it at any step of the game.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.